Okay, so DataTable update. My gosh, I've been working on this pretty heavily for a couple of weeks now, and it's good to be back in the code. So I'm actually having quite a great time doing it. I'm really enjoying it. A number of you that know me from the IRC channel know that I've been wanting to get my hands on the code and make some stuff better in DataTable for a little while. And I suppose I should mention that today is January 19th, um, 2012, and this is open hours, and we're talking about a DataTable update prior to, so this is a preview of what's in development for DataTable in 3.5.0. So right now, we're in 3.4.1, and there's DataTable is undergoing a major refactoring, in case you weren't aware. Is undergoing a refactoring for 3.5.0 release. It's going to feature new architecture, new rendering methods, and the API will be different. I'm preserving at least some backward compatibility. I'm not breaking my neck trying to make it fully backward compatible because the APIs and the architecture, to make it fully backward compatible, I would be spending a lot of time making it backward compatible instead of adding features which are currently somewhat lacking from the DataTable in 3.4.1. So I think people are more interested in getting the features in there than backward compatibility. So that is an assumption. And speaking of assumptions, I am fully anticipating that some of the decisions that I've been making, although I've been trying to be really open about having discussions and asking people's feedback and making sure that the code is out there and available, but I am pretty heads down in the code, and I don't expect people to be following along. So with what code I'm producing. So this is the opportunity to raise some red flags, to let me know if I'm missing something or if something that I have done in the code as it stands in the development branch is genuinely foolish, or it will just utterly break stuff that you have done. Hopefully, we won't get a lot of that. Hopefully, I'll mostly hear encouraging feedback because that allows me to progress instead of, you know, circle back and refactor code and things like that. But I do want to get your feedback on what's there, and you can either, if you have a mic, then feel free to click the little raise your hand button, which should be down below the chat in Connect, and I'll enable your mic. We have the audio disabled for everyone by default right now because it just got to be too chattery when we were doing a conference calling thing. So by all means, either ask questions, add comments into the chat, or just raise your hand and I'll enable your audio so that you can speak if you have a mic. But the agenda for today is I want to go over what happened. There it is. I want to go over what the current state of development is for DataTable, what the plan is for feature list in 3.5, how I'm doing against that list, go over talk about the gallery module somewhat, and where you can get the online resources and documentation, the state of the documentation, and we'll go over the roadmap, and I'll do a little demo of some of the different configurations and things like that, but then we can dive into the code. So 8 minutes in, let's get a move on. So here we are. Okay, so here, okay. So I just added this page to the wiki, so the YUI 3 project wiki out on GitHub. I added a DataTable roadmap page, which I'll add that in the chat. This is the this is a list of the plan for 3.5.0 and extended through 3.6 and 3.7 and 3.8. The plans get less firm as we go out in versions, obviously, but most of the feedback that I've heard from folks suggests that the ordering of the high priority items in each of these versions, um, there's more noise about the stuff in earlier version than there is in later version. That's not to suggest that a lot of people want infinite scroll and drag reordering of columns and things like that, but infinite scroll, I suppose, in particular. But in the case of infinite scroll, at least, there's pagination, and having infinite scroll is adding a layer of technical complexity for the sake of an alternate rendering scheme over the top, instead of what can be accomplished using pagination. Okay, pagination isn't quite as sexy, but I would rather have I would rather have functional features and be able to present that data than to focus too much on a sexy alternate way of rendering something that can be functionally done now. So that's the reason that infinite scroll in particular is pushed out. But let's focus back on 3.5. So the big change that is happening in 3.5 is the architecture is changing from being based on a column set and a record set, and the record set containing record classes. So it's changing into using the app framework pieces, so in particular the model list and view. And this is all described in the design gist, which I'll bring up the design gist here, and we'll wait for GitHub. Okay, so we'll wait for that one to resolve. So in the design gist where I went over the plan, and of course you can still comment on that, but know that that gist is the implementation that's in that gist or described in that gist is already living in code, with the exception, I think, of one piece, which is so I have no, I didn't have it open already. Here it is. With the exception of the updated API for doing remote data or configuring remote data. So this is the gist for the design, and I imagine most of yours are already familiar with that. But this is at least what the plan was going in, and at this point, this is still pretty accurate. I've been relatively successful in implementing this API, and so far it seems to be working out pretty well. There are some little details missing in here, which we'll go over as we progress through through open hours, but some things are not implemented, such as the y.datatable source class extension for supporting passing in data as an object with description about where the remote source is, the type of source it is in the schema, and those sorts of things. So that's going to be subsuming the DataTable data source plugin and the data schema DataTable JSON schema module, making a little bit easier API. Hang on a second, I need to do. Okay, so let's see, where was I? Okay, so that's the plan for the the source DataTable source class extension, which is not yet implemented. hopefully I'll have an opportunity to do that in the 3.5.0 timeframe. It's not going to happen for PR2. Speaking of PR2, the DataTable implementation that is here in the development branch is not currently live in PR1, which I imagine most of you already know. And the plan, unless some catastrophe happens, which I can't imagine is going to happen, but the DataTable as it is right now in the dev branch will be available in PR2. So it'll be out on the CDN, available for the use statement, a lot more convenient than the current implementation, which requires you to reference my gallery module. So the gallery module, that said, the gallery module, I will continue to update this through the life of 3.5.0 or a 3.5.0 dev cycle. So even through, after PR2 is launched, I'm going to continue to update the gallery preview module with the ongoing development that represents the tip of tree weekly, I guess. It'll be a weekly build of DataTable. So there will be a couple intermediate DataTable builds where I'll be adding the features that didn't make it into PR2. The hope is that the feature compatibility with 3.4.1 will be complete for PR2. And so that leaves PR3 for optimizations, bug fixes coming out of PR2 feedback, little minor tweakings and things like that, and then adding tons and tons of documentation. I'll add some documentation for PR2 obviously as well, since it'll be going into PR2. The user guides and stuff will be there, but I'll want to be adding more documentation through the PR3 cycle as well, so that there are even more examples and more detail in the user guide and stuff. So let's see. The model and model list implementation is in place, and it is working rather well. Earlier on in the development, I had a little issue with the extensibility of the architecture with DataTable. DataTable is the widget, and it has these. It has two attributes for, where is it? Header view, body view, and footer view. And the base implementation, so y.datatable base, is going to have some basic implementations of a body view and a header view. These are view classes, and it's the rendering process for DataTable, the widget, creates an instance of that view class and passes in the t-head node that the table generates, the t-head node, or the table generates a single t-body node, which I'm not 100% happy with, because you can have multiple t-bodies. But one t-body right now to contain the data, and then it calls render on it. And I was a little unhappy with that, because the view, the body view, for example, controls how things are going to be rendered. And so if I wanted to just tweak a little bit how the thing was going to be rendered, there wasn't a really good hook for me to do that, because I was instantiating the view class and calling render on it in the same function, because I needed to instantiate it, passing in the container and passing in the model list. And this is information that Vue is expecting to be write once. You pass in the container just once, and you pass in the model list just once. And so it defines that view. And I didn't want to start breaking out of the view semantics. I didn't want to start breaking the rules of using views. And so sticking with that set of rules made it difficult to say, I'm going to start rendering the body, create an instance of this view, and then call render. Well, I've created this instance, but if you wanted to change a template or change a method or something for how that particular view class worked, there wasn't a real hook for you. And so the only option you had would be to create a new view class. And that would be relatively easy because you just y.base.create your subclass of the y.datatable.body view, and then just override the individual methods in there. So that that is relatively easy, but it's still more overhead than I would like. Instead of just saying, just work with the default view class if you want to do minor things. If you want to do like a major alteration of how the body data is going to be rendered, then maybe you'd be interested in creating a new view class to render out the body. But in the meantime, there's some optimizations and column configuration support that goes into the default body view class that makes it easier to just either extend it or add in little tweaks here and there. So what I ended up doing, which this just happened, I think last week, I was happy to resolve this issue, is that the data table, when you call render on the data table, the default render method calls the render UI, and render UI is fires the render table event. And the render table event has a default function which generates the table node and the caption node, but that's it. And then it says, do I have a header view? And if I have a header view, then I'm going to create a t-head element from this template that I have on the data table. And I'm going to now instantiate this view class, but then I'm going to fire a render head event. And the default function for the render head event is to call render on that view instance. So you have that opportunity where the instance of the header view exists from the point when that it exists, and then that event is fired. So you can do any on subscriptions to render head, and do any sort of alterations to that instance, that view instance, if you wanted to do any tweaking in there, if you wanted to add some plugins or something like that into the body view class, you could do that at that point. And then the default function is just to call render on that view. So that resolved the issue of extensibility with the relationship between the parent widget itself and then these individual views doing some amount of work. So you can let me know. I can actually go over the code of that at some point later, hopefully. But if that makes sense and it seems a little awkward, or you have some concerns about that, then definitely let me know. Let's go back to the roadmap here. So the render performance, the initial performance testing that I did was using Chrome, and then I had to reduce the amount of rows from Chrome to make it not kill IE. But the comparison data that I found and that Todd Smith also found independently, which I very much appreciate, Todd, you doing that. And you actually added the comment with the, you can see at the bottom here. So Todd added a forum post with some testings and performance testing comparing the 2.9 data table and the 3.4.1 data table and the 3.5.0 data table in dev channel. And his findings were very much like mine, which is that instantiation takes longer, significantly longer than the 3.4.1 data table, because it is populating a model list. And the record set, the way the record set was done in 3.4.1 was a simpler mechanism, and creating new models is a little more costly, and populating things in the model list is a little more costly. There's things like attaching each model then bubbles up its events into the model list, and so on and so forth. So it's creating a more complex structure for instantiating, creating a more complex structure for the relationship between the models and the model list and the data table. So right now, that is that is causing a lot more instantiation time. Now, when I say a lot more instantiation time, we'll talk about how that's offset by the render time, because in 3.4.1, the render time, the rendering algorithm was using node instances quite a lot, and it wasn't using a very efficient algorithm, and as a result, it was dreadfully slow. The new rendering algorithm is a hell of a lot faster, so much so that in Chrome, at least, you'll see the rendering of 5,000 rows happens in a couple hundred milliseconds. Now that is offset by the time it takes to instantiate the data table. So the net at this point, and this is for PR2, the net is that rendering and instantiation of a data table in 3.5.0 versus 3.4.1, the 3.5.0 version of DataTable is about twice as fast. So it instantiates and renders. If you take those times together, instantiation plus render time, it happens in about half the time. So for me, that's a pretty significant win. I'm satisfied with that for PR2. One of the things that I definitely want to take care of, and Ryan and Eric will hopefully help me out with this in PR3, if we have cycles for that, is to look at a flywheel pattern. I'm sorry, flyweight pattern, not flywheel. Flyweight pattern for model list, so that it doesn't have to create instances of those models until they are used. So that will help the instantiation time, and it might help the rendering time significantly. It might only help it a little bit, because you'll still need to be working with an instance of model to get the attributes out and things like that for the rendering time. But the current state of the art is that the data table is twice as fast as it was in 3.4.1, and it is only marginally slower than the 2.9.0 data table. So considering the size of the monolith in 2.9, I'm feeling all right with that for 3.4.1. I'm sorry, for 3.5.0. And let's see. So that's the state of the rendering stuff, rendering performance. So right now it is a hell of a lot faster than 3.4.1, not quite as fast as 2.9.0, but in PR3, I will hopefully get a chance to work on that, work on the other part of that equation and make it faster. And my goal is to have it be faster, if not significantly faster than 2.9.0, and I think that we can accomplish that. Okay. Other things that were in 3.4.1 that I wanted to make sure those features, the feature compatibility was there for 3.5.0. Row filtering is right now, it's a function of records, or record set filter. That's not implemented yet. I'll work on that probably in the PR3 timeframe. Scrolling data table, I do have an initial drop of that in the gallery module, which was just pushed yesterday afternoon. So the latest build was yesterday afternoon, and you'll see in the description. I'm keeping the description updated on this for the features that are available. And there's a slightly buggy vertical scrolling, and we'll talk about where that slight bugginess is. And then the horizontal scrolling, I thought it would be easier, and then I spent a lot of time focusing on the vertical scrolling, because that's the real challenging one. And then and then realized that I was missing something kind of obvious for the horizontal scroll, which was going to add a little bit more complication to it. It won't be that much more complicated. I'm not anticipating a technical complication. It's just sort of busy work getting that implementation in there. But that'll be the slight bugs will be resolved for PR2, and the horizontal scrolling will be hopefully resolved for PR2. I'm not prioritizing the horizontal scrolling at this point. I mean, complain if this is an issue for you, but I'm not prioritizing the pure functionality of horizontal scrolling for PR2. I can get that resolved in PR3, I figure. If it means adding other features in right now. So cell formatters and renderers, that is in place, and the current way that that is implemented is, what happened to that? Oh, there it is. Okay. Formatters, so you can configure in formatter. Actually, it might work well to look here. Let's look at this body view. Oh, this is, I guess while we're on the topic, the gallery module has links to documentation, which is out on GitHub. I'm probably duplicating at this point. So you can just follow the link from there to see the API. And I tried to put some pretty descriptive doc comments for what the general API looks like, and with fully loaded data table with other features and things like that, what it can look like. So let's look at the body view class. And this is also part of the new architecture, is that there is a data table, which is an instantiable class. It was not currently, and it is not currently an instantiable class in 3.4.1. I am making y.datatable an instantiable class. It is also serving as a static namespace for the class extensions and other pieces that go into DataTable that are specific to DataTable. So these would not be, y.datatable would not be a namespace to host objects that are generic in nature that can be put on other things as well. But classes, extensions, plugins, things like, well, classes and extensions, not plugins. All plugins go in y.plugin. Those will all go in y.datatable under y.datatable. So body view. So the body view is the default implementation for rendering out the data rows, and it documents the individual column configurations that you can pass in that it supports. A change from 3.4.1 to 3.5.0 is that the column set in 3.4.1 was a class, and it had column instances, which were also a class, and that's gone in 3.5.0. I made columns, the columns configuration here. Columns configuration is just an array of objects, or an array of objects with key and other configuration properties, or if you want to just pass in a string, then it's mapped automatically to the key. But this array of objects is, if you pass in a string, it does replace that value with an object. But what I saw being quite a burden for extensibility in the 3.4.1 data table was that if you wanted to add a plugin or something to DataTable that would add support for scrolling, or add support for sorting, or add support for whatever else, and it had some column configuration included in there, that the configuration was sort of column specific, you would need to then also extend or modify the column class in order to support that attribute, because the data that was passed in 3.4.1 in the column set configuration, this stuff was then passed into the constructor of a column class, so creating a column instance. And that means that if the values in here, those keys that were in that object, weren't in the ATTRS list for the column class, then it was just ignored. And that actually got in the way with sort function. If today in 3.4.1, sort function is implemented 99%, except the column class does not have a sort function attribute, which means that you can configure in your column configuration for DataTable that this particular column has a very specific has a specific sorting algorithm that it wants to use. It's an atypical sorting algorithm. But it's going to ignore it because when that column instance is created from that configuration, it doesn't have an attribute, so it ignores that sort function. All of the rest of the wiring to support sort function is already there. It's all in the code except for that missing ATTRS. So then we start butting into things like, I don't want to have a plugin that's modifying the host class, which in the case of DataTable sort, it would need to be not modifying the host class because the host class is DataTable. It would need to be modifying a grandchild of that host class, not the column set, but the column class instance itself. So it would need to be modifying the column class in order to support the sort function. That's just craziness. So that was really hindering extensibility for the rendering and adding features to the DataTable. So I said columns, they can just be an array of objects. You can add whatever garbage in here you want, make whatever plugins that have whatever column-specific properties that you want, and have your plugin look in those column objects for those keys, and just treat these as basic object bags, just a collection of configuration. So that is a change from 3.5.0. So back to here, these are the column configurations that are supported by the default body view. And I'm splitting formatter and node formatter. So I'm adding a new configuration called node formatter. Formatter, what it is expected to do, and it's going to receive an object with formatter functions for columns will receive an object with these properties. Notice there's no TR, there's no cell. You just get the value from that model, and the data is a collection of, it's just an object bag of all the values for all keys in that model. And then the model instance, I kept a record because it was just for backward compatibility, I guess, but we can talk about that in the actual code. And give me feedback on that if you would rather it be a model property or maybe both. But this is expected to return a string. So you can either return a string or you can update o.value. And in either case, that is what the rendered content is going to be. Oh, I need to update this because there is another one. There's another key called allow HTML. Allow HTML. Todd, the question about will standard named formatters be supported? Yes. I will do that. I don't know if it's not going to happen for PR2, but I'm hoping to get that into PR3. I have that in my list of things to do. What I would like is something along the lines of what Satyam has been championing for a while now, which is to be able to declare a type on an attribute. To say this attribute is a number, type number, or type currency, or something like that, and have the setter and have a renderer or something like that associated with that type at some sort of static configuration level somewhere in the library, so that if you pass in a numeric string into a number type, it'll just convert it into a number. If you have a type currency, then it's going to store it as a number, but it's going to retrieve it via a formatter for DataTable, for example. It would format it into, either $sign or £sign or whatever it is. So, and that also then the formatter would then also be able to access the column object which has additional configurations in it. So if I had a numeric formatter, for example, then I could put in the column configuration, currency sign, something like that, and then I could just reference that from column.currency sign inside of my formatter for assembling those strings. So a little more dynamically. That's the plan. Not going to be in PR2. I want to get something like that in PR3. It might start off as being reminiscent of YUI2 data table, where you can specify the formatter name as a string, and then there's just a set of formatters that behave in the way that they did in 2.9, so they'll know numeric formatting and those sorts of things. But with those additional column configurations, such as currency symbol, those sorts of stuff, and that'll be documented as the plan. So those formatters, and formatters are all string, all day, all the time. And then there are node formatters, and node formatters are formatters that get applied once the DOM has been created. And that so that is going to be passed the TD, and that is the node instance. And it's also going to have this property cell. This is the configuration that's passed into node formatter functions. It's going to have TD and it's going to have cell. Now the cell might be the TD and it might be a liner div. And I say might be a liner div because I took them out in the development channel. So the 3.4.1 data table, and going back to 2.9 and prior data tables, several versions back actually of data table, have rendered these divs inside of all of the table cells to facilitate specifically having content inside of those cells that is wider than the cell's configured width. And the reason that that's necessary to have those divs inside of those cells is that if you configure a column width on a table, this is just an HTML table, you configure a column width on this table using either style or call element or call group, then that width that you assign is effectively a min width. The table rendering algorithm is going to take that content and it's going to say, it's not going to fit. So I'm going to have to blow out the column width. And that really sucks. That's really irritating because you don't have, tables don't support overflow on TD cells and TH cells. If they do, then that support doesn't go back to old browsers. That we also want to have consistent support for that for old browsers. Now, that was the reason that the div liners have existed to date, and I've hated them ever since they went in. And because they double the size of the DOM, they have a tremendous impact on the amount of memory and the amount of rendering time it takes to create this thing. Any modifications to the page that go on now have to deal with a table that could be potentially large, doubled in size, because every cell also has another container element inside of it before it actually gets into the content. It could be a fairly simple DOM if you just have table and table cells with containing text. But instead, you have these additional elements that were there, and they were largely not used. So today, as it stands in the dev channel, I have removed the liner divs, and the content is rendered directly into the TD or the TH. And if you want to have column widths, specify your column widths, there is a class extension for that, column widths, which is included automatically. It's bundled into the gallery module. But there's column width support, where you can configure the width, and that's just a column configuration. So you would say column width equals, or in your column configuration, you would assign the width property in that column configuration. And that is serving as a min width. And that caveat is documented in the class extension here. Well, not very well, apparently. I don't know what happened to the documentation for that. That's a bummer. actually have some good details about that in the anyway. But if you need an absolute width where it will truncate content, that can be implemented just by adding a formatter that renders out a liner div inside of the TD, and it contains the content. The other way of doing that would be to modify the template, the cell template, which is something that you would need to do on the body view instance. And so that modification, the cell template modification, is something that you would need to do in an event subscription to render body. I'm not entirely happy with that, but it's better than not having access to the cell template at all. But so you can choose if you want to render liner divs into all of your cells to support absolute widths. You can do that in at least two ways, and that still relies on you assigning the width in your CSS. That would be setting the width of these liner divs and assigning overflow to whatever you want the overflow to be, presumably hidden. So in the meantime, the current state of the table is that it renders out just the table with tbody with TDs containing data, no liner divs. If there is a compelling reason, and I am still open to this, I might put up a fight, but well, I guarantee you I'll put up a fight, actually. If there is a compelling reason that the liner divs should always be there, then I will add them back in. I might cry a little, but I would add them in if it was technically necessary. Okay, so no liner divs. So that the formatter and node formatter. So let's see. And the reason that it is split into two, formatter and node formatter, is obviously because I don't want to create nodes unless I absolutely have to. But that's based on the new rendering algorithm for, let's see if this actually goes through. Damn. Oh well. That's a bummer. This actually goes through to, let's see, I'll just do this in my is that right? Oh, okay, so then body view, ding. Okay, so the rendering algorithm, what the rendering algorithm does in DataTable today, in the dev channel, I'm sorry, not today 341, but today in the dev channel, is that it creates a row template, and it takes the column configurations that were passed into DataTable, and what it does is it translates that into an HTML string with placeholders for the columns to drop in. So this is all the template that's generated here is, what does that create? So okay, create row template. So what that's doing is it's taking the cell template and the row template, and then it's doing a little extra funkiness here, which is not scrolling my screen. It's not making me happy. Okay. Okay, so then it takes this cell template here, and it takes the content. It takes things like it takes content, and oh, this is header view. No wonder I'm confused. Why is it looking at header view? Did I get that? What the heck is going on? All right, so the doc's all messed up. Anyway, come on now. Wait, what? Oh, that's fantastic. Oh, I see. Okay. Let's do this. That's right. I forgot I'm looking at not a single file. I'm sorry, I'm not looking at an individual file for the body view. I'm looking at a concatenated file. So this is sort of an aside, but because the data table module is the data table architecture is built from a lot of individual modules that represent bits of functionality and sort of cobbled together. So there's a bunch of modules that work in concert, but I can't really do that for the gallery. So create cell, wait, row template. Right, so I can't do that for the gallery modules. So what I do for the gallery modules, I just concatenate them all into one big thing, one big set of code. And inside of the code is a lot of there are individual YUI.adds going on inside of the module definition for this one. So it's actually creating modules inside of the module body for this preview module, and then it's immediately using them, and that just makes it easier for me to cobble it together as a gallery module. But so it assembles a row template, and the row template is then used. I think I actually describe it right up here, which would be nice if it scrolled in response to me doing something. Man, what the heck? Okay. I thought I did a good enough job documenting this. Anyway, so it uses the row template, which is just an HTML template, and then it substitutes in the values that come from getting the attributes from each of the models and running them through formatters. Now, this is the reason that the formatter works with strings and strings alone and not nodes is because at this point there are no nodes. So the create row HTML takes that row template, substitutes in the value from the model, applies things like odd or even class for row striping, executes formatters, applies the empty cell, man, just not responsive, applies the empty cell value if the leftover value is an empty string or undefined. And then this is an important point here that I commented in the chat. The configuration object, the column configuration that I need to update that in the body view documentation, is that there is a column configuration called allow HTML. And this is a preventative measure for cross-site scripting. So if you're, unless you say allow HTML true, it is going to pass all of those column values through the HTML escape. HTML escape is just y.escape.html. And then, so if you so that means that if somebody puts in if your site has user contributed data, then you get to then you don't have to worry about using that user contributed data as a cell inside of or cell data inside of the table, unless you say allow HTML. So by default, everything is escaped. If you want stuff to go out as HTML inside of from a formatter, this is from a formatter, not from a node formatter, from a formatter, then if you want HTML, you have to specify allow HTML true. That also applies to empty cell value. If you have an empty cell value that is HTML, you will still need to specify allow HTML. So this is all HTML, and it's just assembling a big inner HTML string. And then that inner HTML string populates the t-body, and boom, all of your records are there in the table. And that's a hell of a lot faster than creating node instances and iterating through those node instances. But that is where apply node formatters comes in. And apply node formatters is the third step in the rendering process, where it has taken that HTML that has been generated from the row templates, populated by all of the model data, and it has created the t-body node. Now, mind you, it has not created node instances for any of the nodes inside of the t-body. At this point, it's all just DOM elements. So we don't have to worry about memory leakage of node instances polluting the node cache and so on and so forth. But if you do need, for whatever reason, and the use cases, I admit, I haven't yet heard a use case that's particularly compelling, that you have to have a node to do the work that you need to do, then you can apply the node formatter, and the node formatter is going to receive those different. Yeah, there we go. It's going to receive the different set of properties, including the TD in the cell. And that's actually going to create a node instance for each of those cells, and potentially a node instance for the liner if there is a liner div there. And then it's going to let you execute that. If you have a node formatter for your cell, it is entirely up to you to populate the content of that cell. I'm not going to, there's no default value that's put into it. The empty cell value doesn't apply. If you have a node formatter, what goes into that cell is entirely decided by that node formatter. If you return nothing, or if you do nothing in that node formatter, then nothing goes into the cell. Okay. That's the split between formatters. For formatters and node formatters, polling data source, right now I have a patch that is mentioned here on the gallery module page. There is a patch to let y.plugin.datatable data source work with the new architecture. I have that linked in the gist. And it's really, I mean, if you look at it, it's just one line of code, basically. I'm updating the onDataReturn initialized table to populate the data attribute instead of the record set attribute. So you don't have to wrap it in a module like I did in that gist. You can just change that directly in line if you want. It's up to you, however you want to implement that. And so let's see, I have like 3 minutes. How am I possibly going to keep doing this? This is crazy. So that allows you to have remote data today until I get the new source configuration. Hopefully we'll get that going in PR3. That might end up just being a nice API on top of the current infrastructure. I'm not entirely sure. I'm not too jazzed about the current architecture of the DataTable data schema, how those pieces fit together via plugins. I just find that a little awkward. But if it will work today with the gallery module with that patch, so you can certainly hit the gallery module with all you've got for remote data. And that facilitates the polling data source, because what you're doing is you're working with the data source, which hasn't been changed. Add, remove, update rows. There wasn't an API for this in 3.4.1, and I added an API for it. So there's now a mutable, which adds add column, remove column, modify column. That's funny. This didn't get subsumed into here, but you can actually see this in here. So there's add row, add rows, add column, get column, modify row, and so on and so forth, right? So those are just sugar methods on top of accessing the data, modifying something in the model instance, and then reassigning the data in there. Right now, the code is not optimized to take an individual model change and just update the row that represents that that model. It just redraws the entire content. That's slow, I know. I just haven't gotten to implementing that fine grained stuff. That's going to happen in PR3. So that's mutability. Sortable, I'm working on right now. That'll hopefully be done, today, in the next couple of days. There aren't any technical challenges beyond some stuff having to do with model list sortability, which I noted actually in the issues list I have. Ding, 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 ding. Let's do this. So this is the list of issues that I'm tracking right now anyway. And so there's, oh, that's right. So the API that I want to have for data table sorting is coming from a discussion that we had in the YUI channel, and the API is going to support these different signatures. Probably only this and this will work. Name ascending, descending. This will work for 350 because there's there's an issue with sorting model lists based on multiple keys and having a complex comparator and that sort of thing. If that gets fixed for 350, then awesome. There will be multi-column support, a multi-column sorting support in 350 data table. So that'll already be an improvement over what is currently there. Let's see. Hey, Ryan, do we have a meeting? Because I'm already out of time, but there was talk about... All right, Ryan says he's on it. Yeah, my 11 o'clock meeting might have been canceled, so...
I think our meeting has been canceled.
Hooray! I can keep going without too much pressure unless everyone just bails on me. But okay, so
I think you probably should summarize. We don't want this to just run for hours and hours.
All right, fair enough. Okay, so column sorting, custom sorting will be supported. I do have cell access, row access. Progressive enhancement is not there for PR2. I'm working on that for PR3. So we'll be able to take a table that is rendered and just use that. I won't clobber the markup. I'll just augment features of functionality onto existing markup. There is a risk in the progressive enhancement case where if you're modifying the data and stuff, then I can't necessarily intelligently update the markup like you have it done if you did it if you did it in a way that's different than how DataTable would render it. So there's a risk of the markup not being exactly how you had it, but I'll work on that. There might be something I can do with templates and stuff. So there's ARIA support for scrollability right now. I don't need to apply any ARIA rules to the table out of the box because it's not dynamic, and so it renders out as a single table, which screen readers work on and deal with just fine. When a vertical scrolling table is being used, then I have to split that into a set of headers, and so this is actually two tables, one table up here, one table down there. But for proper accessibility, I wanted these two to be read out by screen readers as one table, and I was able to accomplish that actually with a fancy trick using ARIA. So that's good news. So the liners have been removed, and what was a set of duplicate headers in 341 and 29 and going back has been removed. The duplicate headers have been removed. Now there's just a table with a T head and a table with a T body. So simplified DOM there. Pagination, Pat Cabot is working on that, and I'll tag team with him on that as soon as I get the sortable and scrollable stuff working. So that will be in 3.5.0. Hide and show columns is a stretch goal. Message T-body API. This is for no rows found, that sort of thing. I don't have any support for that right now. This mostly impacts remote data, and then there's like loading and things like that you want to say. I don't have that API built yet. I do really want to get that in 3.5.0 because it seems like it'd be really awkward without it. And then fixed column widths, that's actually there except for the absolute column widths. So what's coming up next is 3.6.0. The main feature is cell editing via a couple of different means. I want to do keyword navigation and get some custom cell click events and things like that. Like selection, oh yeah, row selection, highlighting. In 3.7, I'll be working on the treble issue, so expandable rows, drag reordering of rows, and then maybe a T-foot API. In 3.8, I'll be tackling the infinite scroll stuff. So that's so this, like I said, that's the roadmap is up on the wiki. You can feedback to that as you will. But again, the summary is that the dev channel for DataTable is available on the Gallery DataTable preview module, gallery module, and that's updated weekly. If you really want to be bleeding edge, then catch me in IRC, and you can just follow my fork of the YUI project. This details what's there, and the API docs are available for this. It has some code examples down here. It's not quite as thorough as it could be. I trimmed the hell out of the CSS for it, which was nice to do. So the CSS is significantly smaller. But the gallery module is there, and it will continue to be there throughout the 3.5.0 development cycle. It will be the DataTable architecture as it is right now in the dev channel will be available in PR2 for just inclusion in your use statement. So if you want to flex the features that are in preview status and good solid status for PR2, then you'll be able to just use DataTable or use DataTable base, probably use DataTable in as of PR2. And if you want to continue to follow along with the weekly releases, then the gallery module will continue to be updated through the 3.5.0 development cycle. I do have a few other bugs that I need to attend to that are not DataTable related in the 3.5.0 cycle, and of course I'll be doing a ton of documentation, so there may be some weeks that I don't update the gallery module, but that's based largely on feedback and if I can convince myself to stop writing code and start writing more documentation stuff. So we didn't get into flexing the API and actually looking at what the API looks like too much. But I'm just going to take a second here. And, oh, that's not at all what I wanted. Oh, and also I don't think scrollable data tables supported nested headers in 3.4.1. I could be wrong, but it does now. Oh, another thing about scrollable that I kind of liked is that I made it scroll. I activate the scroll bar and I do the split table thing only if it renders beyond the configured height. So it won't make it scrollable. It won't do any fancy DOM changing or anything like that if the data that you have to go into those dimensions fits within those dimensions. It won't split the table. So you won't see like an empty scroll bar there for whatever reason. If you think that's a terrible idea, then let me know. Okay, so here just putting some dummy data. And here, populating the data with the array, I have a little test that worked out the data source there, but you can set scrollable Y, scrollable X, scrollable XY. Also scrollable, this is configuration directly on the data table. This is not a plugin. So you can just set scrollable if you have that class extension included. And then the columns, here I have width, so this is using the width support added by the column width class extension. Again, I'm using allow HTML. This is a very similar column configuration that you were doing previously anyway. Setting height and width. Also, if you have scrollable set to Y and you don't have a height configured, it's not going to make it scrollable because it doesn't know what it's going to scroll inside of. Similarly with width. So then there's add row, remove row, modify row, those sorts of things. And updating the columns to add a formatter and stuff like that also works just fine. There's an awful lot more methods behind the scenes than there are in the forefront in the public API. So yeah, see what I'm saying? It's slightly buggy, the vertical scrolling. And I actually know what's going on there, and it sort of mystifies me, but whatever. Yeah, so I think that's going to have to do it for now. We've gone over 10 minutes, and I appreciate you guys sticking around for that extra time. And I'm in the YUI channel, and there is the gallery module that you can comment in that forum. Find me in IRC. You can find me in the YUILibrary.com forums. Talk about that stuff there. There's the wiki page wiki page to reference with the roadmap. The design gist is available, and the API docs are available. And I think that's going to have to do for today. So there should be plenty of opportunity for you to keep updated on what's going on with the development, and I definitely want to hear from you if you are adventurous and flexing the API, and if you're running into any issues with it, or if there are any really awkward pieces that you are taking issue with how they're built, then I want to hear that. So I'm going to call that a wrap on Open Hours for today. It's 11:11. Make a wish, and we will talk to you hopefully next week. But if nothing comes up, then maybe I can. If you have some ideas for that you want to get some info and update in Open Hours next week, then let me know a topic. Otherwise, I'll try and come up with something, and we'll talk to you again next week. So thanks everyone for calling in.